John Winsford, come here now.
What's this?
The bribes paid to the contracting officials. And how exactly did that come across your desk?
Once is a mistake, twice is suspicious. John Winslet did this for 7 straight years across $19 million in Army contracts and left a paper trail for every single one.
The vehicles, jewelry, firearms, and cash tied to the awards.
Interesting. I always wondered which piece you would pull first. Turns out it was the gifts.
He would not get the chance to explain that morning. Within 72 hours, federal agents from 3 separate agencies had seized his laptop, his phone, and a binder full of contract assignment sheets that documented 7 years of corruption. 2 contracting officials, more than $100,000 in bribes, $19 million in steered Army contracts, and a separate kickback architecture that funneled $723,000 back into the pocket of a single defense contractor working out of Bristol, Rhode Island. By the time the case closed, John Winslet would stand in a federal courtroom in Honolulu, leaning on a cane from a recent knee surgery, and listen to Chief Judge J. Michael Seabright deliver a sentence calculated to send a message to every contractor who had ever thought a small installation was too remote to matter. Before we go any further, I have to ask, have you ever worked somewhere small enough that you thought no one was really watching? An office, a base, a job site where the oversight felt thin? Drop that experience in the comments and subscribe if you want to see how a single contractor captured an entire Army installation's procurement pipeline. We cover federal corruption cases every week, and this one is the contemporary archetype. John Winslet was born in 1954 in Bristol, Rhode Island, a small bayside town built on shipyards and naval supply work. His father was a foreman at the old Herreshoff manufacturing site before it closed, and his mother kept the books for a local marina. Bristol in the 1950s was a working town with a working memory. Everybody knew the contractors. Everybody knew the men who built things and the men who paid for them. Winslet grew up around the language of construction and the language of bidding. By the time he was 12, he could read a punch list. By the time he was 16, he was running a paint crew at the marina on weekends and pocketing $30 a Saturday under the table. The neighbors who hired him said the same thing: quiet, reliable, showed up early, stayed late. He graduated from Mount Hope High School in 1972 and enrolled in the construction management program at the Rhode Island School of Design's Extension Division, then transferred to a 2-year program in civil estimating at the New England Institute of Technology. He finished in 1975 with a certificate and a starting wage of $4.10 an hour at a Providence general contractor that specialized in federal projects, small repair jobs at the VA hospital, boiler replacements at the Naval War College, re-roofing work at the Quonset Point Air Station before it closed. That first decade taught him the geometry of the federal contract, the bid package, the set-aside categories, the technical evaluation, the price evaluation, the contracting officer's discretion. He learned which contracting officers wanted detailed schedules and which ones wanted a clean lowest price bid. He learned which subcontractors paid on time and which ones needed to be threatened. He learned the difference between a small business contract and an unrestricted contract, and he learned that the people who held the pen on those decisions were not generals or admirals. They were civilians at GS-12 and GS-13 grades, sitting in beige offices on the backside of the installations, making decisions that moved millions of dollars a year. He married a woman named Patricia in 1981. She worked as a paralegal at a small firm in East Providence. They bought a colonial on Hope Street in 1986, 2 blocks from the Bay, for $98,000. 2 daughters followed, both born at Newport Hospital. The family was unremarkable in the way that successful Bristol families were unremarkable. Sunday cookouts, a Boston whaler on a trailer in the side yard, Christmas at his mother's house on Wood Street. By the late 1990s, Winslet had moved through 3 different general contractors and ended up as a senior estimator at a Newport firm that did Navy work across the entire Northeast Corridor. His evaluations were consistent, detail-oriented, excellent technical writer, strong relationships with government counterparts, capable of managing complex multi-phase procurements without supervision. In 2007, a Virginia-based veteran-owned firm called REK Associates recruited him. REK specialized in construction, range management, and environmental services for U.S. military installations, with an existing portfolio at Aberdeen Proving Ground and Fort Bragg, and growing interest in Pacific work. The pitch was simple. They wanted a senior contracts manager who could embed at military installations and run the on-site relationship with the contracting officers. 6 figures plus per diem, travel, eventually his own portfolio. He took the job. By 2010, he was rotating through Hawaii. By early 2011, his portfolio was concentrated on the range at Schofield Barracks, the U.S. Army's principal training installation on Oahu. And that is where the story changes. Schofield Barracks sits in the center of Oahu, in the saddle between the Waianae and Ko'olau mountain ranges. The installation has been an active Army post since 1908. The range complex itself stretches across thousands of acres of training land, where artillery is fired, vehicles are run, and units rotate through live fire qualification before deploying. The physical scale of the range is the first thing you notice. The procurement scale is the second. Keeping a training range operational is a constant construction and maintenance project. Roads have to be rebuilt after every rainy season. Target systems have to be replaced. Environmental remediation has to be performed on impact areas. Magazines have to be inspected and recertified. Buildings have to be maintained, replaced, demolished, and replaced again. Across any given year, the contracting pipeline at the range at Schofield Barracks moves tens of millions of dollars in federal contract value, distributed across dozens of separate awards. The contracting architecture is supposed to protect that pipeline. Every contract above a certain dollar threshold goes through a contracting officer, a federal employee at a specific grade level who holds a warrant from the Department of Defense authorizing them to bind the government. The contracting officer evaluates bids on technical merit and price. The contracting officer awards the contract. The contracting officer manages the contract through performance. The contracting officer signs the modifications. The contracting officer accepts the work and authorizes the final payment. That warrant is a serious instrument. It carries personal liability. It is supposed to function as the integrity firewall between the contractor on one side, who wants the work, and the taxpayer on the other side, who is paying for it. The firewall depends on 2 things. It depends on the contracting officer's independence, and it depends on the contractor's honest competition. If either one breaks, the entire architecture collapses. At the range at Schofield Barracks, both broke, and they broke at the same time, in the same place, with the same 2 people at the center of it. The 2 contracting officials would later be named in the federal indictment. One of them, identified in court documents as Raby, would eventually retire from the Department of Defense and walk straight into a job at REK Associates that Winslet arranged for him. That post-government service hire was not a coincidence. It was a feature of the architecture. The operation started in 2011. The first bribe was cash, a few $1,000s, hand-delivered, in an envelope. No one took notes. No one filed a report. The 2 contracting officials accepted the money. Therefore, Winslet knew he had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, and he knew he had not been caught. The pattern escalated through 2012 and 2013. Cash payments became routine. The amounts grew. The frequency increased. The bribes started to include items more expensive and more personal than cash. Diamond earrings, more than $2,000 in value. A gift that signals a sustained relationship rather than a single transaction. The kind of bribe that involves the spouse of the official, that puts a piece of physical evidence in the family home, that ties the recipient to the contractor across years rather than weeks. Then the firearms started. A Remington 12-gauge shotgun, the kind that goes into a gun safe for hunting season and stays there for a lifetime. A Gustav Genschau and Company 22 long rifle, a German-made piece valued by collectors. And then the Mauser Model M98 in .375 caliber, a large game hunting rifle that holds significant value in the military firearm collector community. 3 firearms across the conduct window, all transferred outside any legitimate sales channel. Then came the vehicles. In 2017, Winslet bought a brand new Jeep Rubicon and arranged for it to be transferred to one of the two contracting officials. A contemporary off-road vehicle that would have read as a major lifestyle purchase for a working military contracting official, making a middle-grade federal salary. Anyone looking at the recipient's parking pad would have noticed. No one noticed. No one checked. He followed the Rubicon with an antique 1969 Ford Galaxy, a collector's car, a piece that takes effort to source, takes effort to restore, and takes effort to give. The Galaxy was not a transactional bribe. The Galaxy was a relationship investment, and then a Harley-Davidson motorcycle, the iconic American brand favored by military veterans and retirees. A motorcycle is a recreational gift that signals an ongoing personal friendship rather than a one-time transaction. Bridging vehicles, jewelry, firearms, and a motorcycle, the bribe inventory reached above $100,000 in aggregate value across the 7-year conduct window. In exchange, the two contracting officials gave Winslet the one thing more valuable than money. They gave him information. Confidential Army budget information for projects valued at more than $7 million. Internal evaluation data. Source selection guidance. The pricing thresholds REK needed to beat. The technical requirements REK needed to meet. The competitive landscape REK needed to navigate. With that information, REK Associates won contract after contract. Across the conduct window, the company secured at least $19 million in U.S. Army contract value at the range at Schofield Barracks, construction work, range maintenance work, environmental services work, project after project, award after award, all routed through the same two contracting officials, all evaluated by the same two contracting officials, all signed by the same two contracting officials. But the bribery architecture was only half of the operation. The other half was the kickback architecture, and the kickback architecture is what made the scheme genuinely profitable for Winslet personally. The federal contracts were awarded to REK Associates, the prime contractor. REK then had to assign portions of the work to subcontractors. Winslet, as the senior contracts manager on the ground, held the discretion to choose which subcontractor received which assignment. Therefore, that discretion was worth money to any subcontractor who wanted the work. One local Hawaii subcontractor figured out the price of that discretion early. In exchange for Winslet's assignment of REK's awarded contracts to that subcontractor, the subcontractor paid Winslet kickbacks. Not occasional, not modest. Across the conduct window, the kickback payments totaled $723,333.33. The fraction matters. The exact figure was reconstructed from bank deposits, invoices, and the subcontractor's own records during the federal investigation. The combined picture was now clean. The bribery side produced the awards. The kickback side produced the cash. Across 7 years, John Winslet had captured an entire installation's procurement pipeline and was bleeding it from both ends. And he had not been caught. The federal joint investigation did not start with a confession. It did not start with an audit. It did not start with an angry losing bidder filing a protest. It started smaller than that and quieter than that. What exactly triggered the case is something the Department of Justice did not detail publicly. What the public record reflects is that by 2018, the Army Criminal Investigation Command's Pacific Fraud Field Office had opened a procurement fraud investigation targeting the range at Schofield Barracks. Army CID brought in the Defense Criminal Investigative Service, the investigative arm of the Department of Defense Office of Inspector General. DCIS brought in the FBI Honolulu Field Office. The three agencies stood up a joint task force. The special agent in charge for Army CID was Ray Park. The special agent in charge for DCIS was Brian Denny. The special agent in charge for FBI Honolulu was Eli Sam Miranda. 3 federal agencies, 3 special agents in charge, 1 installation. Federal procurement fraud investigations move slowly because they have to. The agents needed bank records. They needed contract files. They needed source selection documents. They needed travel records. They needed phone records. They needed the kind of evidence that would survive a federal trial, not just a press conference. They served subpoenas, they interviewed witnesses, they walked through every contract award at the Schofield Range across the conduct window and asked the same question on everyone. Who recommended this award? Who approved this award? Who benefited from this award? Who steered the technical requirements? Who provided the budget information? The paper trail led to the two contracting officials at the center of the pipeline. The financial trail led to the bank accounts of those same two officials, where the agents found the deposits, the vehicle title transfers, the firearm purchase paperwork, and the jewelry receipts. And the contractor side of the trail led to REK Associates and to John Winslett personally. The parallel kickback architecture took longer to develop but produced the cleanest evidence. The local subcontractor's own books recorded the payments. Once investigators sat down with the subcontractor and walked through the deposit history line by line, the $723,333 figure assembled itself. By late 2018, the Federal Joint Task Force had what it needed. The evidence that the Department of Justice eventually presented through the Criminal Division's fraud section did not depend on a single dramatic piece. It depended on the convergence of multiple independent records, each one pointing to the same conclusion. First, the vehicle records. The 2017 Jeep Rubicon, the antique 1969 Ford Galaxy, the Harley-Davidson motorcycle. Each one purchased through legitimate channels, each one with a paper trail showing the original buyer, and each one with a transfer document or a custody trail leading to one of the two contracting officials. The Department of Justice noted the vehicles in the federal forfeiture inventory. The titles told the story. Second, the firearms records. Federal firearms transactions generate paperwork. The Remington 12-gauge shotgun, the Gustav Genschau and Company 22 long rifle, and the Mauser Model M98 in .375 caliber, each had a purchase record. Each one ended up in the possession of a contracting official who had no documented purchase of his own. The chain of custody pointed back to Winslett. Third, the jewelry. The diamond earrings worth more than $2,000 came with a receipt. The receipt named the buyer. We are about to walk into the courtroom. Before we do, if you have made it this far, you already understand why this case matters. Subscribe and hit the notification bell. We break down federal corruption cases that the mainstream coverage tends to bury after a single news cycle, and the sentencing in this one is worth sticking around for. Fourth, the steered contracts themselves. $19 million in U.S. Army contract value awarded to REK Associates at the range at Schofield Barracks across the conduct window. Each award supported by a paper trail that, in retrospect, no longer looked like a normal competitive procurement. The same prime won. The same two contracting officials approved. The same technical evaluations came in just inside the parameters REK needed to clear. Fifth, the confidential budget information. Internal documents that should not have left the contracting office turned up in REK Associates' internal files. Investigators traced the chain of custody. The information had a single source. Sixth, the post-government service hire. After contracting official Raby retired from the Department of Defense, Winslett arranged for REK Associates to hire him. That move would have been damaging on its own, but combined with the bribery record, it became the architectural keystone. It demonstrated that the corrupt relationship had been engineered to outlast the contracting official's federal service. The bribes during service, the job after service, the whole arrangement designed as a long-term partnership rather than a one-time transgression. Seventh, and most decisively, the kickback payments. $723,333.33 flowing from a local subcontractor into John Winslett's accounts in exchange for his discretion to assign REK's awarded contracts to that subcontractor. The subcontractor cooperated. The bank records were unambiguous. The fraction was not a rhetorical flourish. It was an arithmetic artifact of the precise per-contract percentage Winslett had negotiated. The Department of Justice consolidated the case into a federal indictment naming Winslett and the two contracting officials. The case was assigned to Chief Judge J. Michael Seabright of the District of Hawaii. Trial attorney Laura Connolly and Principal Assistant Chief Justin Weitz of the Criminal Division's Fraud Section led the prosecution, joined by Assistant U.S. Attorney Mark Wallenstein of the District of Hawaii. The charges against Winslet were two: conspiracy to commit honest services wire fraud, conspiracy to accept kickbacks in connection with a government contract. In September 2019, John Winslet pleaded guilty to both. The public moment of confrontation in a federal procurement fraud case does not look like a roadside arrest. It looks like a guilty plea entered in a federal courtroom under the eye of a federal judge, with the defendant standing in a quiet aisle behind a defense table, his attorney to his right, the prosecution to his left. The guilty plea hearing in September 2019 walked through every charge. Chief Judge Seabright addressed Winslet directly. Judge Seabright: Mr. Winslet, do you understand that by entering this plea, you are admitting under oath that the conduct described in the information actually occurred and that you committed it? Winslet: Yes, Your Honor. Judge Seabright: Do you understand the maximum penalties associated with each count? Winslet: I do, Your Honor. Judge Seabright: Are you entering this plea voluntarily and of your own free will? Winslet: I am, Your Honor. Judge Seabright: How do you plead to count 1, conspiracy to commit honest services wire fraud? Winslet: Guilty, Your Honor. Judge Seabright: How do you plead to count 2, conspiracy to accept kickbacks in connection with a government contract? Winslet: Guilty, Your Honor. There was no theatrical denial. There was no shouting. There was no lawyer's flourish about a misunderstood relationship. Winslet's guilty plea was procedural and final. Sentencing was set. Sentencing was then continued. The continuance was unusual. Winslet's defense filed a motion explaining that he was scheduled for reconstructive knee surgery and would need recovery time. Chief Judge Seabright granted the delay. A guilty federal defendant does not always get accommodations of that kind, but in this instance, the judge agreed to wait. The knee surgery happened. The recovery took months. Across that period, the case stayed open. The prosecutors worked on cooperation requirements. The defense worked on a sentencing memorandum. The contracting officials' cases ran on their own parallel tracks. By January 2021, Winslet was ambulatory again. Travel was possible. Sentencing was scheduled. On January 15, 2021, John Winslet appeared in the federal courthouse in Honolulu for sentencing before Chief Judge J. Michael Seabright. He used a cane. He stood when the judge addressed him. The government's sentencing memorandum laid out the conduct in clinical detail. 7 years of bribery. More than $100,000 in bribes to 2 contracting officials. $19 million in steered Army contracts. $723,333 in kickbacks from a single local subcontractor. The post-government service hire of contracting official Raby into REK Associates. The full picture of a contractor who had captured the procurement pipeline of an active U.S. Army training installation. The defense memorandum acknowledged the conduct, emphasized the guilty plea cooperation, raised the medical condition, and asked for a sentence below the federal guidelines range. The defense argued that Winslet had no prior record, had a long career of legitimate federal contracting work prior to the conduct window, and had taken responsibility through the September 2019 plea. Chief Judge Seabright addressed the courtroom. Judge Seabright: What this defendant did was not opportunistic. It was sustained. It was structural. It was an arrangement built over 7 years to corrupt the procurement integrity of a United States Army installation in a manner that touches the operational readiness of every unit that rotates through the range at Schofield Barracks. The taxpayer pays for that range. The soldiers train on that range. The contracting officials are sworn to protect the integrity of that pipeline. The defendant compromised 2 of them and converted the pipeline into a personal income stream. Judge Seabright continued: The kickback architecture with the local subcontractor is, in many ways, the more revealing element of this scheme. It demonstrates that the defendant did not view his corruption as a single act of indiscretion. He viewed it as a business model. The bribery side produced the awards. The kickback side monetized the awards. The post-government service hire of a former contracting official into the defendant's company closed the loop and was designed to ensure that the relationship outlasted the official's federal career. That is not a lapse of judgment. That is architecture. The sentence was 70 months of federal prison, 5 years and 10 months, plus 3 years of supervised release, plus restitution, plus forfeiture of the proceeds of the scheme, including the vehicles, the firearms, and the jewelry that had been transferred to the contracting officials. The 70-month figure reflected what Chief Judge Seabright described as a calculation about appropriate deterrence balanced against the September 2019 guilty plea cooperation and the documented medical considerations. It was not the maximum possible sentence. It was not a token sentence either. It was the kind of sentence that says to every defense contractor in the federal procurement system that the Department of Justice will take 7 years of corruption seriously, and that the small remote installation is not too remote to reach. Winslett was designated to a low-security federal facility appropriate to his age and medical profile. His attorney requested designation to a facility with adequate medical infrastructure, given the recent knee surgery. The Bureau of Prisons made the designation. He surrendered. He began serving the sentence. The two contracting officials at the center of the architecture faced their own cases. The local subcontractor that had paid the kickbacks faced its own resolution. Rec Associates faced its own consequences and the broader scrutiny that follows any contractor whose senior personnel are indicted for federal procurement fraud. Schofield Barracks faced the institutional reckoning that comes when a corrupt procurement architecture is exposed at a single installation. Since the Winslett case, the range at Schofield Barracks' procurement pipeline has been the subject of expanded oversight. The broader Department of Defense contracting integrity question, which the case left open, is how to design installation-level procurement review systems that detect a sustained bribery and kickback architecture before it runs for 7 years and captures $19 million in steered contracts. That question is still being worked. For John Winslett, the 70-month sentence runs across the back end of his 60s and into his early 70s. He will leave federal custody as a man in his early 70s with a federal felony record, a 3-year supervised release tail, a permanent debarment from federal contracting, and a name that will appear in every Department of Defense procurement integrity training case study for the next generation. The Mauser is gone. The Galaxy is gone. The Jeep is gone. The earrings are gone. The $723,333 is gone. The career is gone. The 7 years he spent building the architecture became the 70 months he will spend serving the sentence for it. That case was structural, but the case on the right-hand side is even more revealing. Click it now.